And for more analysis, we're joined by Ginger Chapman, an American Affairs expert and Republican Party member from Washington, and Dr. Olga Krysniak, an international relations professor from Moscow. Good evening to you and welcome to Qnews. Now, Dr. Krysniak, Vladimir Putin made strong remarks today threatening to target decision-making centers in Kiev, potentially with hypersonic missiles. So, will such statements offset future negotiations mediated by the incoming Trump administration?
Of course, so we need to acknowledge one important fact that before diplomacy begins, everything will be somehow decided on the battlefield. And of course, everything what is happening on the battlefield, on the front line, where this military conflict is occurring now, it is the way which will be used in future negotiations, peace negotiations. And of course, the potential use of by Russia of all these ballistic missiles and many types of this, well, it would be one of the way to strengthen our position in future peace talks. So definitely they will come, but on one conditions and on in which way it will occur. So we will see. So now everything is decided in the battlefield.
Right, Mrs. Chapman, Putin has questioned the legitimacy of Ukrainian leaders, while Ukraine has refused to make any territorial concessions. How can General Kellogg manage to bridge the wide gap between these seemingly inconciliable positions?
Yes, well, good day, and thank you for having us today. Greetings to your viewers. And General Keith Kellogg is in a very difficult position, even though he says he's going to insist on slowing down the weapons to Ukraine unless they negotiate, or increasing the flow unless Russia negotiates. These are hollow threats because, as my colleague mentioned, the facts on the ground, the battlefield will control what ultimately happens. And we do see that right now, Russia is actually winning the war. They are in the dominant position, so they have very little incentive to negotiate on Kellogg's terms, because the one thing America cannot give Ukraine is the thing they need most, which is more men to fight on the battlefield. And additionally, the weapons we have been giving them, as it turns out from seeing Russia's hypersonic missiles, and especially the test of the Orishnik several days ago, is that Russia's military hardware at this point is superior to American hardware. They've been developing their military systems since 2018, when Trump pulled out of the intermediate missile treaty with Russia. And so now we see that not only are General Kellogg's negotiation strategies and his levers of pressure on Russia are unlikely to be effective, but indeed, at the end of Biden's administration, Biden is laying the groundwork to escalate the situation in Ukraine and thereby trap Trump into a situation in Ukraine where it will be very, very difficult for Trump to fulfill his promise of making peace. So as we see now, we are on an escalation ladder in Ukraine. It does not look as though General Kellogg is in a very strong negotiating position. And I must agree with my colleague that the conditions on the battlefield will ultimately determine the resolution in Ukraine.
You raised a very important point here, which is the escalation on the ground. And we'll get back to this point again. Dr. Krysniak, what could be the key factors that could make or break Kellogg's plan for freezing the battle lines? And are there precedents that support the success or failure?
First of all, we need to acknowledge that it would be Russia's position, it would be Russia's conditions which predetermine peace negotiations. Of course, the role of the United States is huge because they provide military and financial help to Ukraine. But still, it would be Russia who would lead peace talks, and it would be Russia who would push forward its own agenda. But anyways, anything which is any initiative coming from the United States with the peace talks and with the Trump proposal and his idea of stopping this conflict in 1 week or 1 day or maybe in a few days. So it may be far away from reality. But of course, we understand that America's involvement has its role, its critical role. And the more continuation, the more help they will give to Ukraine, military help, the more people will die at the first place from Ukrainian side. So when this stop will be finished, will be over somehow, it will just only come closer to the end of this conflict.
But here, let me ask you about the points put by Kellogg, and would they make a kind of leap or a step
yes.
towards an acceptable peace for Russia?
That would be Russian territory, so the Russian controlled territory, which is a part of the Russian Federation now, which is used to be Ukrainian, but still Russia has its historical right to obtain this territory. Second, it's definitely its non-involvement or even non-negotiation of Ukraine being a part of NATO, this military alliance. And everything related to Russia's safety and security on its border, because Ukraine, it's Russia's backyard territory. It's just historically been this way. So, and Russia would not change its attitude. So, non-involvement in NATO, and of course, considering for Russia from this international law perspective, all this territory which Russia already controls.
Mm-hmm. That's, of course, from the Russian point of view. Let me take here Mrs. Chapman. Mrs. Chapman, you spoke about the escalation and the battleground, which will be a decisive factor to where these negotiations are going. Looking ahead, do you see Kellogg's appointment and plan as a stepping stone for peace or simply as a temporary measure?
Definitely see this as a temporary measure. So far, the strategy he's laid out does not seem to lead to peace. With respect to freezing the lines of conflict on the prevailing lines, we've seen with the North and South Korea, freezing the lines of conflict is a failure. It does not lead to peace, as we've seen on the Korea demilitarized zone. And furthermore, Russia will not agree to that because, one, the people of Donbass have spoken. They want to be part of Russia. They voted on this. Two, the last time Russia agreed to freeze the lines of conflict were the Minsk agreements, and that's when the United States and NATO took advantage of that peace interlude to rearm Ukraine. So moving forward, I do not see Kellogg's appointment as a substantial step toward peace. The American people are alarmed because this looks like Trump is falling into the Washington deep state trap. And many people are already complaining and hoping that Trump will reassess some of his nominations and reassess his strategy so it's not dictated by the conditions on the ground and what Biden has already done to escalate the conflict.
I may ask you about Biden's decision to escalate the violence, but after I take here Dr. Krasniak, how might Russia perceive Kellogg's plan, and could this be seen as a strategic advantage for Moscow as is?
This plan or any plan coming from Western countries cannot be considered by Russia as a real plan or maybe totally or automatically accepted because, like I said, Russia has its own strategic interests, and this military conflict for Russia has its existential dimension, and we need to acknowledge this. So, and we would not sit and wait when Mr. Kellogg or Trump or anyone else will suggest some peace plans, and we would just follow this. So definitely it's not on the the table. Definitely, it's not an option. But the only thing which can be considered here, if or when American military help will be stopped, and then I believe so this conflict will go to the dimension of and the burden of this conflict on European countries. But definitely, I do not believe that the Western countries they somehow stop to do something to stop its plan for somehow to make a damage to Russia. So in this case, we wouldn't follow any leads coming from Western countries because they definitely have their own interests and they do not coincide with Russia's interests.
Mrs. Chapman, you spoke about the Biden administration and that it was escalating the situation. And we're speaking about very precise time. We're speaking just ahead of Trump assuming office in January. We're speaking about 1 month. Why do you think the Biden administration has chosen to escalate the situation at this very precise and very critical time?
Yes, that is an excellent question. And there are several reasons behind the Biden administration desire to escalate. One, Biden may be very angry, and he is doing this to lock Trump into continuing the war, because when the situation escalates, then America is more involved, and the more involved America is, the harder it is for us to extricate ourselves. And most importantly, as Senator Lindsey Graham has pointed out, Ukraine has $12 trillion worth of valuable mining or valuable minerals. Ukraine has rich farmland that Zelensky has already made agreements with American corporations to turn over to them. So there is a lot of high-powered multinational corporations, very big money that have had their eye on Ukraine's resources. And furthermore, the United States has always used Russia as a villain to justify America's military buildup. But as it turns out, Russia is very rich in resources. Russia has $75 trillion in resources. And the previous American plans to weaken Russia, break it apart, and then somehow gain control of their resources, this plan is in play, but America has to go through Ukraine first. So this is once again an example of American hegemony, America wars of expedition to weaken other countries, gain control of their resources. However, this is not the America of 30 years ago. America is no longer the military superpower that we were in 1991 when the Soviet Union fell. So America is approaching a time of reckoning. And it looks like when Trump assumes office, he will be the first president to have to deal with America's weakened stature militarily, our weakened economic stature. The more that Lindsey Graham threatens other countries with sanctions, the weaker America gets economically.
Yes, Ms. Chapman, we'll get back to you again on this very particular moment. But before we continue our discussion, let's take a closer look at Ukraine's uncertain future in securing U.S. support, with shifting American public opinion and mounting European responsibility. The outcome of this geopolitical struggle will redefine global security dynamics.
As U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's return to the White House looms, Ukraine faces an uncertain future in securing continued U.S. military support. With a growing public sentiment in the U.S. against foreign military engagements, evidenced by recent polls showing 51% of Americans oppose continued aid, Ukraine's prospects depend heavily on adjusting to Trump's isolationist stance. His America First policy demands that Europe take more responsibility for defense, reducing U.S. involvement. To maintain U.S. aid, Ukraine must align its strategy with Trump's preferences by framing the conflict as part of a broader effort to weaken Russia, thus preventing future threats to American interests. Moreover, Ukraine must emphasize the increasing contributions of NATO and EU members, positioning the conflict as a shared burden to reduce the cost to the US. However, Ukraine faces significant military challenges. Russia's recent territorial gains in key areas like Donetsk and Zaporizhia underscore the difficulties on the ground. This, combined with U.S. fatigue over prolonged foreign commitments, risks diminishing American support. If U.S. backing wanes, Europe and NATO will bear more responsibility, but given their own economic and security struggles, their ability to fully replace U.S. aid remains uncertain. This evolving scenario threatens to weaken NATO's unity and embolden Russia, further destabilizing European security.
Yes, welcome back. And back to Mrs. Chapman, where we were speaking about, right before this report, your words, plus from your point of view, General Kellogg has an extensive military and diplomatic background. How might this shape his approach in resolving the Russian-Ukraine issue or conflict? And from your point of view, would he really be able to, or would he be able to reach such an approach?
Yes, that is a very excellent question with his military background. It appears that Kellogg will actually be limited by his military background because this conflict, the solution is going to be political. Militarily, the United States is weak. The United States is not militarily weak. However, right now, the Russian advancements in military technology are going to dominate the battlefield. America needs to negotiate. Our European partners have also been weakened economically. We've seen from the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline that Germany, the economic powerhouse of Europe, is now in a weakened position. So America and NATO we do not have a winning hand in this conflict. So instead of sending out General Kellogg, who has a military background, it seems that we need more diplomacy and more reaching out for a political background. Trump's appointments that are rattling the saber and trying to show military strength are ultimately going to weaken the United States negotiating position because we cannot back that up. We need to look for alternative pathways to peace in Ukraine and also the Middle East. These are both traps which will explode right after Trump takes office.
Right. Dr. Krasniak, part of the colleagues' point of view or the plan is the freezing of the battle lines. From your point of view, would the freezing of the battle lines solidify Russia's control over certain territories? And is this acceptable? How does this resonate with Russia's long-term strategies in Ukraine?
Well, I do not believe that freezing the conflict, freezing the front line, it would be an acceptable options for Russia. So definitely not. As just a few minutes ago, my colleague said, this similar position or similar issue, the resolving issue within the Korean War definitely did not prevent a conflict. And now we see still this region of Northeast Asia is very unstable. And now it's become even more dangerous with North Korea obtained with nuclear weapons. So in getting back to the front line and the battlefield in Ukraine, so we see. So Russia has its plan or an ambition or an aim, so not to freeze the front line, but to advance its position and maybe to have some additional offensive operations. To go deeper into the Ukraine. So once again, it's not the Ukraine is a sovereign state. It is a historically Russian territory with Russian-speaking people. So and definitely freezing the front line, it's not an option. It's about to demilitarize the rest of Ukraine. So what will be rest? And it's about to obtaining or having just only nuclear status for this part of Ukraine, which will be called as Ukraine. So, but freezing the line, so definitely it's not an option.
Mm-hmm. Mrs. Chapman, the choice of Trump for Kellogg, your take on that, and definitely about the Kellogg plan that includes leveraging the U.S. military aid as a negotiation tool. So, how do you think this strategy could be effective in resolving this situation here?
Unfortunately, leveraging U.S. aid is not going to be an effective strategy. As we've seen, the people in the Donbass are ethnically Russian, and essentially, money and weapons will no longer help the Ukrainian people. They are desperately short of men. And additionally, the United States is running out of munitions. We're running out of weapons. And as we've seen, our ATACMS, our HIMAR missiles are able to penetrate a short way into Russia, but all this does is provoke and escalate the situation. We are outclassed on the battlefield. So essentially, we are weakening our leverage, and it looks like for the negotiations, Russia really will be in control of what ultimately happens in Ukraine.
But
It
will
is
it
their
convince
territory.
Ukraine? Will it convince Ukraine to come to the table of negotiation here? Will it be aligned with, of course, the U.S. allies?
This will only anger the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have centuries old dispute with the Russians. The United States is a newcomer. And as we've seen, the militias in Ukraine have threatened Zelensky for the past year by saying if Zelensky negotiates with Putin, his life will be in danger from his own people. Ukraine is not in a position of power, and any negotiations the United States try to continue is not going to resolve the centuries-old argument and conflict between the Russian and the Ukrainian people. Ultimately, all this will do is weaken the United States' position overseas and further show the world that the United States needs to pull back and focus on our domestic issues. The danger for Trump is he is going to get trapped in these foreign policy conflicts early in his administration, and history shows that when a president focuses on foreign conflicts, he is unable to live up to his domestic issues. He will be unable to fix America as he has promised to do. So we are in a very critical point right now. The escalation in Ukraine, the escalation in the Middle East, in spite of the
Yes.
ceasefire, this is going to be very, very dangerous for Trump's incoming administration and especially for his domestic policy.
But we have to admit that the world geopolitical scene really reflects on the whole situation or the whole world, particularly economies, and I guess it has reflected much on the United States economy there. Definitely, that was Ginger Chapman, American Affairs expert and Republican Party member from Washington, and Dr. Olga Krishnik, an international relations professor from Moscow. We thank you both